Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here talking about brand strategy and trademarks today. And my sincere thanks to the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation for collaborating with me and Canaan Bridges Consulting on this initiative today. Now, we're living in very interesting times. Thank you as well to Deshaun for all his help before the seminar started today and also during the session as well. Now, we're living in really interesting times. It's a challenging and interesting times for managing your trademarks, for even starting your business. And there's so many different aspects of business ventures, entering into a business, developing your brand that we need to be mindful of in order for brands to be sustainable, not only in Bermuda, not only in regional markets, the Caribbean, but also internationally as well. And so for the next hour that I'm spending with you, I hope to delve into some of these issues on a more in-depth level, but also practical level in a way that is relatable to you, whether or not you know anything about trademarks. My focus today is to inform you and also to help you in your ventures as you proceed throughout your branding journey and your business journey. So today's session focuses on how do you commercialize your brand? How do you, specifically your trademarks, how do you commercialize your trademarks, and how do you manage your brand in this context as well? Now, branding is all about story, and how successful you are in there when you're developing your brand, when you're starting your business, is really all about how you position your brand and your story in Bermuda, in the Caribbean, and also in international markets as well. A significant part of branding is trademarks. And so in terms of what I'll be talking about specifically today, trademarks as an aspect of your brand strategy, also monetizing your brand. What types of measures and policies are important in monetizing your brand? What types of challenges are out there also? And also, if you've gotten certain things down pat in terms of monetization, how do you manage your trademarks as well to ensure that it remains sustainable in markets? And of course, I welcome your questions, and the floor will be open up to your questions at 2 different times during my talk today, midway and at the end of the discussion as well. Now, you may have heard, I'm sure we're all familiar, if I were to say hands up, how many of you have heard about trademarks strategy? The answer would be, I'm sure everyone would be raising their hand at this time. But it's a very integral part of branding. And really this is because there's so many products out there and services, and a lot of times the markets are themselves saturated. And so as a business person, you always constantly have to be thinking of, how can I distinguish myself from my competitor in my specific consumer market? Now, a study was done a few years ago, about 3 years ago, by the World Intellectual Property Organization, that indicates that that intangible part of your product or service is actually more valuable than that tangible part of your product. So if I were to talk about this on a very practical level, if your product is, say, a clothing line, the branding aspect, and specifically the brand itself of your clothing line, it could also be a perfume, it could be a food business like pizza, or any type of other product, the actual brand is actually more valuable than the product itself. And according to the World Intellectual Property Organization research that was done in 2017, that aspect, that intangible aspect of your brand is worth at least 1/3 of your brand value. And of course, this intangible aspect is referring to your intellectual property. And the one aspect of intellectual property are trademarks. You may ask, what are trademarks? We hear about this term all the time. There's the concept of trademark, and there's the law and the right of trademark. Now, trademarks really are, it could be, I'll talk about this a little more later in subsequent slides, but it could be a sign, a symbol, a word, even a taste, a smell, so for now we'll say a mark that distinguishes your product or service from another. So it serves as a way of identifying your product or service. It shows origin. It also, to your own intellectual property and business portfolio, it shows the goodwill of your brand as well. It gives information to consumers and to the general public about your product and about your business as well. Because sometimes, especially if you have a number of products and services that your business offers, one specific brand may actually tell the story about that specific product, but it also ties into the larger organization as well. So the trademarks is what consumers see. It's what they interact with. And so there is a very strong reputational link between your product, your service offering, and the mark that you choose to associate with your product. Examples, there's so many examples out there, but for today, I thought of bringing to your attention a few that I'm sure you're familiar with. There's Digicel, and we know that Digicel is associated with a cell phone market, also phone cards, and so on. There's also Barrett's Ginger Beer, which is a Bermudan drink, and it's also popular in overseas markets. There's McDonald's. We're more than likely all familiar with the McDonald's mark. There's the Nike mark, Just Do It. And it's notice as well that in regards to Nike, it's not just the name Nike, but it's also the word just do it. And I'll talk about this later in terms of when you have a trademark, you can actually use a phrase can be trademarked. And when that phrase is trademarked, it doesn't mean that no one else can use it, but it does mean that you have the monopoly in regards to those specific goods or services that's associated with that name in the market. There's also the Sandals hotel mark, and in terms of a sound mark, sounds are registrable in Bermuda, and I placed the example there of MGM Lions Roar logo, which we're probably familiar with. It's that sound that you hear at the start of some movies. It's also at the ending of some movies. It's the lion's roar. And that lion's roar is actually a registered trademark. And what that means is no one else can use that roar in association with movies and whatever else MGM has registered the mark with. So if you think about what I've just said so far, having a trademark gives you a form of a monopoly right, exclusivity in regards to the term. So it could be a word, a symbol. It could also be in some jurisdictions, it can be a three-dimensional mark. In some jurisdictions, it can be a hologram. In other jurisdictions, it may be a smell. In some jurisdictions, like in Bermuda, it can be sound. And what it does is it gives you as the business owner, the exclusive right to use that specific name in association with those goods and services. Now, it doesn't mean that other persons can't use the name. They may be able to use the name in association with other types of services that are not associated with what you do. uh, you know, I'm trying to keep things a little bit basic, so I won't really go into well-known marks. We could probably have another virtual workshop on well-known marks. And what this means is that there are times when the name has gotten so popular in consumer markets that the courts will say, you know what, it's reserved for that specific business and that specific business only because it is so well known. I'll move on from there. So the next point that I want to talk about, and before I even do so, to everyone, welcome, who are just joining in, thank you for joining me, because I know that there are so many other things that you could have been doing during your lunch hour. And so I appreciate this time that you're spending with the BEDC and with Canaan Bridges Consulting, Inc. Now, let's say you're interested in monetizing, which we all need to be as business owners. Your trademark, that's a part of your brand strategy. How do you monetize your business? Because when you're monetizing your business, you're also monetizing your trademark. So for starters, and if we're focusing on the intellectual property specifically for this specific purposes, the trademark aspects of monetization, what do you do? And so I recommend, if you're registering your trademark, it can be unregisterable, and I'll talk about that later as well. But say you're registering your trademark, there are a few things that you need to be mindful of, and always use an effective strategy. And by the rest of the discussion, you'll find out what I mean by an effective strategy. If you're registering that mark, it could be the name of your business, or it could be not the name of your business, but be mindful of what it is. And especially now when we're all living in a very digitized environment where the globe is essentially at our fingertips by accessing the internet. And so there are some marks that are scandalous or disparaging or morally reprehensible, that some names that are not registrable as trademarks or images. And so if you're for starters, especially if you're a startup, you have to be mindful of the name that you want to use as to identify with your brand. For example, there was this very popular case in 2019. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in the United States, where this clothing manufacturer, he manufactures a line of streetwear clothing, and he's been doing this since the 1990s. And he's called his brand a specific name, and it's not a very morally acceptable term. And he wanted to register the name as a trademark, and the trademark office kept refusing the registration. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court said it is registrable as a trademark. Even after that, he did encounter problems registering the mark. I'm not sure if it's registered to now. It's it's that word, that four-letter word, and what he did was to spell the end of the word with a T as opposed to what is usually spelled with. Now, in other jurisdictions, for example, if your eye is on the global market and you are, say, manufacturing alcohol, and you'd like to have that alcoholic beverage, your market is global, and you'd like to have it registered somewhere in the United Arab Emirates, note that you would not be able to register alcoholic beverages there as a trademark. And so these are things that if you know more about how different countries deal with trademark registrations, that will help you along the way as a starters, as a part of your branding strategy and your trademark strategy. Another tip, which is really helpful, and Bermuda is a part of this as well, is there is this system called a Madrid protocol that enables you as a business owner or someone who's helping a business owner to use one application to register your trademark to different countries. So it's more procedural. So say, for example, you were interested in registering your trademark in Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, the Bahamas, Canada, the US, and specific countries in the European Union. This protocol, so it's more like a platform, you could go on it, fill out one application form, state the countries you're interested, and it's best to do this, you could do it with the help of legal counsel. You state the countries that you're interested in registering your trademark with, and the application, you would, in effect, as long as there is no substantive issues with your trademark in the different countries, you would actually be able to register and obtain registration in those countries, given that there are no problems with it. And so for starters, those are two things that I believe are important. Now, it's also possible that you're not interested in registering your trademarks. You're not interested in registering your brand as a trademark. There is still some level of protection out there for you if your mark were to be infringed, or if someone were to be using your mark in a way that is contrary to regular business practices. But the problem with this is, for example, if your mark is unregistered and your business is in Hamilton, and someone else were to be using the same name that you're associating with your product and service in association with their goods, the remedies that you have would be very limited. And this not just only goes to your jurisdiction, but there is an international treaty and convention that states this. So you would be protectable to an extent, but only if you can prove that there is a confusion, actual confusion, between your product or your service and the competitor's service. You also have to prove that your product has goodwill. You have already obtained some type and specifically strong reputation of your product in your consumer market. Now, if you cannot prove these, then you have very little recourse in regards to infringement. And I'll talk about, soon I'll take your questions. So if you have any questions, please do type them in, and Deshawn will be navigating the questions, letting me know what the questions are, and I'll deal with them from there. Now, going back to the discussion, we spoke about, if you just kind of going over what I've already covered, the importance of ensuring that that name resonates in your consumer market, the importance of registering your trademark, the importance of choosing a name that is acceptable, not only within Bermuda, but also regionally and internationally as well. And this forms part of your trademark strategy. Now, as I touch on trademark strategy, it is also important to know that a trademark strategy is a larger part of your business strategy, your business goals, your business plans that you kind of need to keep tweaking, adjusting, and so on during the course of the life cycle of your product or service. And so moving on, but still on monetization, there's so many different types. I would say there's so many, but there are different types of business strategies that you as a business owner can use in monetizing your mark. And so the question is, what strategy do you use, right? Because sometimes you may prefer to retain not only full ownership and control, but to have your business, to manage the marks on your own, to manufacture your product yourself, enter into distribution agreements, but still not and do any type of licensing or franchising of your mark. And that is quite possible as well. So it really depends on the market that you're in and the product that you're focusing on, or the service that you're offering. A part of this could be franchise. What if you're interested in starting a franchising business? Where does brand value, brand sustainability fit into this? And for the rest of my discussion, there are two words that I'd like you to think about, and have them somewhat resonating at the forefront of your mind: brand differentiation and brand sustainability. And when you think of these two terms, brand differentiation and brand sustainability, think of them based on what we're talking about today. And you could also say, in terms of your own perspective on differentiation of brands and sustainability, does what I'm saying today fit into it? And if so, how? All right, so when we think about a franchise agreement, it's really a contractual arrangement between you and other companies, other individuals, to use your own business model. So the concepts, procedures, equipment, your entire business model as to form their own business. A part of that is you're actually giving those franchisees permission to use your intellectual property. In this case, permission to use your brand, and a part of that, your trademarks. And so if this is your business model, franchising, you've got to ensure that you have an effective trademark strategy in mind. And when we think of franchises, examples, Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, TJ Maxx, but there's so many others as well. There's also trademark licensing. So what if your business is very intensive in terms of its focus on branding and trademarks? And so what you can do as an option is license your mark. You may choose to license your mark for others to actually use the mark on specific products and services. And so this could be distributors, or you could give them also the permission to use your brand, your brand name, when they're selling a product that you have nothing to do with, but you believe that you will get exposure by going into these activities. There's also another type of trademark that's called a certification mark. And when you think of a certification mark, it's another way of monetizing your mark. When you think of certification mark, think about standards. It's a product or service that you're offering where it's very big on using a specific set standards in the performance of the service, in the manufacturing of the product, or it could be based on the geographical area where the product or service is being offered. But note specifically that with certification marks, you would not be able to actually be manufacturing the product yourself or being involved in the sale of the product. All you can do is license the mark to others for them to do it. And so what you would get in return are royalties from the use of the from allowing all these different other entities to use your mark. That's another strategy as well. And finally, before I open the floor for your questions, you could also monetize your brand, specifically your trademark, through co-branding. And what co-branding does is it allows you to collaborate with another entity, and sometimes it's someone else, another entity that has the same influence out there in global markets. Sometimes it is not, but what it does, it enables you, it increases your brand exposure in the market and also builds your consumer base. So it's more seen off as a complementarity of brands, complement one brand or one product or service complementing another. And so how this works is you would give the other company the permission to use your mark or your logo, and sometimes concepts about your products in their own products as well. And this brings to mind, an example is the Nike, and when Nike and Apple collaborated to offer the Nike plus iPod device, which is actually a device that was part of the Nike shoe line that enabled users to track their pace in terms of their walking and their running. And so it provided brand awareness and build the values of both brands. So these are ways really of monetizing your trademark out there, not only in Bermuda, but also regionally and in your selected international markets as well. I'm going to stop there right now, and I really would like to hear from you. Are there any questions that you would like to ask me? Deshaun, are there any questions?
There are no questions as of right now, but we do open the floor to everyone and encourage everyone, if they do have questions, to please add them to the chat box. Great.
Thank you, Deshaun. I appreciate that. I welcome your questions, and as a teacher and a lecturer, I am of the principle that there are no silly questions. All questions are worthwhile. And so if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So far I've covered monetization of your brand, monetization of your trademark, and now I'll talk a bit about managing your trademarks. And so remember before when I said, think about brand differentiation and also brand sustainability. The first part of my discussion really focused on brand differentiation. How do you distinguish your service offering, your product in Bermuda from other products? And now for this part of the session, the focus is on how do you sustain your brand out there, right? Especially now when markets are volatile, and a lot of times the markets are saturated. If your product is not very well distinguished, it will not have a very long life cycle. And so there are 3 points or 3 different areas that I'd like to focus on, and I'd like you to bear in mind during your entire business journey. And these relate to 1, how you deal with infringements. That's really important. Another one is monitoring or controlling. If you're into licensing, as a business owner or part of a group that is involved in licensing an aspect of your business, you also have to focus on how do these licensees use your mark. That's important. Another part of this is keeping a check. So this is your own internal strategy, keeping a check on how your mark is used or how you use your mark, not only in Bermuda, but also in other countries as well. And so If they're not, are there any questions so far?
Yes,
Deshaun?
so far we have 2 questions. So someone asked.
I'll go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, it says, how similar can one brand be compared to another brand before it is considered a problem? And then they gave an example of McDonald's golden arches as compared to McDowell's golden arcs.
Okay, all right. That's a really good question. Does the person want to give their name so I can say, you know, I can make it very personal?
His name is Norman.
Norman, it's good to meet you. I can't see you, but thank you for your question, Norman. And it's actually a really good question, and it's one that courts deal with on an everyday basis. It's also one that jurisdictions, meaning countries, have different answers for. Again, it goes back to evidence. And the evidence would be, what do consumers actually think at a first glance? So you gave the example of McDonald's golden arch with Deshaun, help me here, the other name.
McDowell's. So it looks like it was depicted in the movie Coming to America.
Okay, all right, with McDowell's. So it depends on, well, let's make it really personal. What do you think of as a consumer at your first glance when you see those two arches and those two names? So the courts will consider whether consumers are actually confused, and for this they will use surveys. They'll also call in expert witnesses to give evidence in this regard. They can also go to social media, use social media clippings on reviews and see, you know, if there's, just canvass the internet out there to see if there's any incidents of people complaining that there is actual confusion between the two marks. Now, it's not only the mark, but also the type of what they are associated with, right? So I'll give you an example later on. Well, I'm actually going to be talking about a McDonald's example, although it was not in the concept of confusion, but of use. But in terms of confusion, the courts will also look at, are the goods and services the same, right? So is McDonald's, that arch mark, and McDowell's, are they doing the same type of business? So, you know, I go back to Coming to America, and I remember that movie well. It's a restaurant. Are they selling the same types of sandwiches, food services, edible products? The courts will go back to the statement on which the trademark was registered. So what types of services and goods the trademark is associated with. And based on that, they will analyze from there if there is confusion. But chances are, if both competitors are in the same type of market, meaning their consumer base is the same, and the names are very similar, and if there's a logo attached to the name and the logo is also very similar, then there will be a likelihood of confusion. There was another case that if you don't mind, Deshaun and Norman, that I'll mention, and this happened in Jamaica in 2016. It went to the, I believe it was the Supreme Court, where someone wanted to register the term Pepperwood Jerk Pit. There were two names, Pepperwood Jerk Pit and Pepper Tree Jamaica West Indies. And the question was, well, one of them tried to say the other mark should not be registered because it was very similar to their own. And the court ruled that the names, although there is a little bit of similarity between the names in terms of pepper, but that's the extent of the similarity. Everything else is different. One is saying Jamaica West Indies, and the other one relates to jerk pit. And so, although they were both related to seasonings in terms of the product, the court ruled that there was no confusion. So sometimes it's also case specific, but there is a large body of case law out there which will give you that criteria and guide you. the more similar they are in service offering, product offering, market offering, geographic reach, the greater will the chances of confusion be. Next question, Deshaun.
Oh, those are all the questions so far.
Oh,
the
okay.
second one was him saying it in Coming to America.
Ah, okay. Norman, I'm hoping I answered your question well, and I appreciate your question. Thank you. All right, so I'll move on. Deshaun, how am I doing with time so I don't have to appear that I'm going off camera to look at my clock?
Good. It's 1:06, 24 minutes.
Okay, 24 minutes to go. Okay, thank you. All right, so now in terms of managing your trademarks, what do you need to be mindful of? You know, I mentioned dealing with infringements, if you're licensing your mark, controlling how your licensees use your mark, and also strategies within your own business that you actually practice to protect the mark as well. And for example, you know, I like to bring up examples when I do these talks, and it makes it more practical and relatable to those of you who are listening. In terms of infringements, it's not just infringements that you have to be mindful of when you're managing your trademark, but also unfair competition and also depreciation of goodwill. And unfair competition would be, for example, someone using the same name as your product. And say, for example, in this case, it's the Barrett's Ginger Beer, and someone also calling their product Barrett's Ginger Beer, and they say from Bermuda, manufactured in Bermuda, when in fact it's not. So that would be an example of unfair competition because it's dishonest business practice. And so these are different things that you have to be mindful of, you have to watch out for, because chances are if you as a business owner are not watching out for these things, you could miss them. An example of this, and this is very recent, this happened, we're now in May, so this happened in April or thereabouts, where if you remember, there was an artist, or there is an artist who decided to have his own form of sneaker brand, and by inserting a certain amount of blood drops into the sneakers and selling them, and this was under the brand MSCHF. Now, these were based on the foundation of this design was using the Nike, one of the Nike sneaker brands. And so Nike launched a lawsuit against the artist, the singer, and the sneaker manufacturer to say, listen, you are damaging my reputation, you're damaging my goodwill. I don't agree with your position on this business strategy, this branding strategy that you're taking in the use of my sneaker. And it didn't go to court. It was actually settled out of court, where the MSCHF had to stop distributing or manufacturing, making the sneaker, and that was the end of that. So as a brand owner, you have to be vigilant in your market to ensure that if someone is doing something associated with your name or your product, or the way they're even depicting it in social media, if you believe it's affecting your brand value, then you do have a legitimate interest in going after them. Then last year, there was the case of 3M N95 mask, where the maker of the N95 mask, 3M, he launched a lawsuit against certain distributors and persons on Amazon who were selling fake masks. And I was saying there were, you know, it's unfair business practice. They were actually also inflating the prices of these masks. And again, this was settled out of court, and there was over $190,000 that 3M got from these infringers, and they donated it to purchase PPE equipment to healthcare workers. So that's interesting, and that goes to damage control. And so these are important aspects of infringements. Another side to managing your trademark that it's always good to be mindful of. I'm almost through. I know we're almost approaching the end of the session, and I do want to hear your questions as well, or your comments on anything that is said. Now, the other part of it is controlling that mark. If you are licensing your product out there for others to, for example, to distribute or to use the mark or the logo or the name on a specific product, always ensure that that agreement that forms the contractual relationship between you and this other person or business contains provisions on trademark licensing, trademark use for one, and the fact that you will monitor their use of your trademark. An example of monitoring could be you having the right to audit how they use that mark in association with your goods and services. For example, is it being used on invoices? Is it being used on social media, websites, letters? Because at the end of the day, especially if you're thinking global, there are certain jurisdictions that will say, we have the right to cancel your trademark because it's not being used commercially. So even though your trademark is registered, it can be canceled. And if it is canceled, it affects your brand value. And so always ensure that if you're, for example, if it's a pizza business, then, and you've registered your pizza business as a trademark for, you know, the making of pizza, also the delivery of pizza and so on, it attaches to those services. And if you have distributors or licensees, they're using it in that context as well. Also be mindful of how these issues are dealt with internationally. For example, the EU may deal with these issues differently from in Canada. Canada does deal with some of these issues differently from the US. And so these are things, you know, just to have when you're thinking about brand sustainability. The other point as well, and I'll go over this quickly, are be mindful of your renewal dates. So say, for example, you've registered your trademark, and in most jurisdictions, it's renewable every 10 years. So say, for example, it becomes effective as a trademark today, then you have 10 years from today to enjoy exclusive rights in the use of that trademark. At the end of that 10 years, or approaching the end of those 10 years, you will be given the intellectual property office will contact you or your legal representative and say, renew your trademark. Now they'll give you a specific time to do so, and if you don't renew it, it's expunged, it's canceled. And so, I mean, you can always initiate proceedings to say, these are the circumstances that prevented me from renewing the trademark, but save yourself the time and money and of going that route, and just, you know, renew it. And if there are any maintenance fees to be paid, pay those as well. Deshaun, how am I doing with time?
You're good. We have 15 minutes, and so far no questions. So
okay, all right. Now we also have to think about not just keeping your renewals in check, but also, are you using that mark? So what you'll find out is, you know, it may be one thing to, especially if your mark is registered, it may be one thing to have that registration and you're so happy that, oh, you know, my trademark is registered. The other thing is, are you using the mark? Now, when I talk about the term use, in most countries, you don't need to have already used your trademark for it to be registered. But in order to maintain it as a trademark, you will need to have used it. And some countries will say, give me evidence that you have commercially used your mark over the past 3 years. And so what this means in jurisdictions, it's more than likely contextual, but it really centered on whether or not you're actively using the mark. And I'll give you an example. Now, Norman referred early to McDonald's, and there was this interesting case in 2019 where an Irish supermarket, a small Irish supermarket, and so in Ireland, wanted to register the term McDonald's as a trademark. And so what they did was, they know that McDonald's as a trademark is already registered, but they initiated a proceeding to say, you're not using the term. They wanted to register the name Big Mac, in regards to food services. And so they initiated proceeding against McDonald's in regards to Big Mac to say, you have not been using the term Big Mac. Now, the term Big Mac is used in relation to sandwiches, right? You have not been using that term in regards to sandwiches. And the court sided with the small Irish supermarket chain to say that McDonald's could not provide sufficient evidence to show that they've been consistently using the mark in terms of invoices, sales of Big Mac products in that jurisdiction. And so the mark was canceled, giving the Irish supermarket the chance to register their product or service offering as Big Mac. That's interesting. Now, another case is, this is recent, but I'll go with if you're in the hotel market, for example, specifically the hospitality industry, and you have a chain of hotels, and you have a mark that's registered, it's registered in Bermuda, your hotel is in Bermuda, you're offering hotel services to the entire globe, and you've registered your trademark in another country. In many of these countries, you also have to be offering a service that is meaningful and that tangentially beneficial to that public in those countries. So in regards to specifically RIU, a lot of us are familiar with that RIU trademark, that hotel chain, and this was a recent case. It may be appealed, where RUI, they actually lost the right to use that term as a trademark in Canada in regards to hotel and restaurant services, because they could not prove that Canadians who were living here in Canada could benefit from hotel services from here or restaurant services. And so to overcome these shortfalls, as a business owner, you have to be strategic. And so you could do what Hilton did, where they tried to offer to their, to the international public some type of service that was beneficial in their country. So it could be loyalty programs, collaborating with a hotel in that country to offer discount on stays, or something of that sort, where persons in those countries can benefit from the actual product, even though the real product is in another country, right? So these are things to be mindful of in managing your mark. I'll quickly do a recap of what I've been talking about today so far. In your strategy, it has to be practical, right? Never think of it in silos. Never think about branding and trademark in silos, but try to integrate it as a part of your business strategy. It also has to be sustainable. That is, whatever perspective, whatever policies that you adapt in regards to brand sustainability. In terms of effective monetization, ensure that it's not just something that you have in your books, or that you talk about, but that you actually practice, that you put it into place, and that it's also achievable as well. And it's not easy. A lot of this takes money, right? A lot of resources, capital, investments. And so a lot of times you have to be strategic. For example, especially because everything is digitized, you may, as a business owner, especially if your product offering is global, find that you're having infringements in many markets. How do you deal with this when you're strained for cash? You have to be strategic and think of where you're having the most infringements, the cost, and also any pros and cons in your overall strategy. But it's also, having said all of this, is extremely important to have that trademark management strategy in place as a part of your overall brand sustainability. And I've come to the end of my discussion today. I thank you for staying with the BEDC and with myself, and I do welcome your comments or your questions.
So we do have 2 more questions from Norman. How does a small business protect their trademark on an international level while being so small, and your business model suddenly expands?
Suddenly expands. Okay, so is that one question or 2? That's one, right?
Yep, that's one.
Okay, Norman, once again, thank you for being, interactive and for the really great questions that you have raised. It's a challenge for small business owners, but I would say start out by doing the research yourself. If you can't, especially at the outset, if you can't afford to hire legal counsel or a trademark representative, I will provide Deshawn with a handout that will be helpful to you and to others as well as to how you can do this in depth. Also with search resources that you can use. Some of these you can actually do on the internet to find out if the name that you're interested in registering for one is already taken by another business. And when you're doing this search, it's not just searching within Bermuda, but it's also global as well. And so that's for a start. The registration, especially if it's for one country, it's not too expensive. I would say, based on my experience in the field, the bulk of the issue is the trademark examination. So going through that examination of your application once you have submitted the application, and this would be to the IP office. But the more you have, the greater knowledge you have, and especially if you have someone on board with you, a legal counsel who knows what they're doing, then it should be okay. So I would say you can actually register your trademark yourself, and this will help you with time and money. And if you do so, ensure that you're doing the proper legwork. There are also other tools available for free in terms of building knowledge, trademark knowledge for yourself. And I have some of this information on my website, but there's also a lot of resources available through the World Intellectual Property Organization platform. And I'll send this information to Deshawn to disseminate to everyone who's attending the conference. There is
the other question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay.
Well, this one kind of piggybacks off the other one. So does this require registration within all markets at once?
I didn't get all of the questions. Sorry.
I think it piggybacks off of registering a trademark. It says, does this require registration within all markets at once?
Okay. So Norman, find out which markets first are the most important for you. And so, for example, if your is predominantly the US and, you know, other Caribbean countries, even though registration in the EU may seem appealing, don't do it, right? So find out which markets works best for you. So where are your target markets? Is it in the US? Is it in Trinidad? Is it Bermuda? Is it Canada? And focus on there. So I would say don't apply for registration for every country all at once, but do ensure that that legwork is done at the outset so that you can know how your name or mark compares out there to other marks as well.
We do have one question from Andre where it says, not sure if I missed this part, but where does one go to trademark a brand?
Okay, so good question. The first starting on the first place that you go to is your IP office. And so this would be, I will send you the information, but you want to think local first because it has to start local. In Bermuda, you would need to register the mark as a trademark in your jurisdiction first, before applying for the trademark elsewhere. Now, I will send you the information of the Madrid protocol that would enable you to do all the registrations or focus on the specific countries that you're interested in doing all at the same time. And this may be helpful as well. So I'll send the information to you. But you got to think local first.
So that's all the questions, but Norman just says, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience.
Thank you, Norman. And the other question was from, was it Mark?
Andre.
Andre, okay, I'm sorry. Andre and Norman, thank you for, for your questions during the session. And I believe, are we out of time?
Yes. Well, 2 minutes, okay. But yeah, those are all the questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for staying with Deshawn, BEDC, and myself during this hour. It was, to me, a really engaging discussion. I really enjoyed your questions, the questions themselves, and also responding to them. And I hope this session was informative. The slides will be available to you to go through, and my contact information is there. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you may have. And I believe Deshawn will be sharing the slides, the PowerPoint, with the audience, correct?
Yes, they're sent out automatically.
Okay, great. Thank you.